Hello and welcome all you lovers of cardboard and everything plastic. Today I'm going to be talking about Dark Souls, the card game from Steam Forward Games. Now for this video, I just want you to know I'm really not going to be talking about the rules here. I made a separate how to play Dark Souls, the card game video. So please, if you really want to know how the game plays, go watch that video first, and then you can come back for this one for just my final thoughts. I'll link the video up here and also in the description below. Now a big thing for this game is going to be how it stacks up to the board game. Is it better or worse? Dark Souls, the board game, was a relatively long game with big giant miniatures, relatively long player turns, randomized loot, really cool boss battles, and just a lot of minor problems all mixed into a pretty cool but flawed package. Dark Souls, the card game, basically takes the board game and truncates it down into a smaller, more digestible package. Most of the changes here are pretty positive and address some of the flaws with Dark Souls, the board game. The biggest change here is that you don't have to worry about stats. Characters start with their own character deck, and this comes with a set of basic weapons and also a bunch of stamina cards. These stamina cards essentially define your class, but you can also customize your deck when you gain more souls. You can buy different types of stamina cards. This makes Dark Souls, the card game, sort of a limited deck building game. But I'm gonna say it's a very flawed deck building game. For one, the big thing is you're not gonna be buying very many cards. I would say I believe my total was about maybe 3 to 4 cards actually being bought, with maybe another 3 to 4 cards being earned through encounters on a per player basis. This sounds like a lot, but when you get down to how weapons work and how the deck building actually occurs, it really doesn't give you a lot of leeway in how to customize your deck. Rarely in this game did I ever take cards out of my deck. I didn't even replace them. I usually just added them because the card limit to my deck got higher. Occasionally on a 4-player game, there were maybe 1 or 2 players who did have a chance to actually replace cards in their deck rather than keep them. This means whatever class you have, you're going to be kind of limited on what weapons you can actually use. So while yes, you technically can use any weapon in this game, which somewhat negates the fact that the loot is randomized, you still run into the problem where if you get a magical weapon and you're the knight, you're probably just not going to have enough stamina cards to actually be able to use that weapon effectively. So much so that it's probably better just not even include it in your deck in the first place. There's also one card that is essentially, well, worthless. You have the Remnant of Humanity card, which allows you to draw another card. In most deck builders, having the ability to draw an extra card is always nice. In Dark Souls, the card game, it can kind of work against you. Since your deck is your health, you don't really want to draw more cards if you don't have to. Add this onto the fact that it's really hard to actually move cards around in your deck. You can be stuck in a lot of situations where there's not a lot you can do. For instance, you may have a hand where you have absolutely no weapons or armor. You either are just going to have to discard a whole bunch of cards hoping to find a weapon card, or just take damage, lose a bunch of cards, and hope you get better cards. Both of these situations suck, and it would be nice if there were more cards in the deck that allowed you to move your cards around. Healing, for instance, allows characters to take cards from the bottom of their discard pile and put them at the bottom of their draw pile. This can be somewhat beneficial for padding out your deck, but if you know what's at the bottom of your draw pile and it tends to be good cards sometimes, it may not be that fun to know, oh, I'm near the end of my deck, there's my last good card, and this is basically our last shot at this encounter. There is one ability that allows you to take any card from your discard and put it directly on top of your draw pile. This is a highly useful ability, and unfortunately in most of the games I saw, it rarely came out. And that really adds up to what I see as sort of a flawed deck builder. It's not an exciting way to really build your deck. You're just sort of customizing it to make it somewhat more efficient, but because you can't really make things all that efficient, it ends up just kind of being luck of the draw rather than any sort of skill or talent. And of course, Dark Souls, the video game, is all about overcoming really hard bosses with a certain degree of skill. A lot of these problems only get exacerbated depending on their player count. For instance, I played quite a few 4-player games, and for the most part, a 4-player game is extremely easy. Way too easy to be really considered a Dark Souls game. This is largely because you're using 4 classes. Each of the classes have specific cards that help you with specific enemies. For instance, it's super useful to have the Sorcerer, who's got magic damage weapons that can hit enemies that have that magic weakness. It's also extremely useful to have the Herald, who can heal characters. So if there's any particular character that's taking a lot of damage, you can actually have them be healed and they'll last a little bit longer. On the other hand, if you play the game solo, with the base set rules, the game's pretty much impossible. Of course, this all depends on the luck of the draw. If you go by the enemy deck, for the most part, the skull enemies, even solo, you'll be able to do them. But then when you get to the helmet enemies, and let's say you're playing the knight, and then a magic weakness enemy comes out, oh, you don't have any magic items in your deck. They have 3 defense, which is the max damage on any weapon in this game. You just have to give up right then and there because it's impossible. There's no way to break that defense. There's no way to get through it. You're done. Now, yes, a lot of these problems can be fixed just through a little bit of deck customization. Just take out those magic weakness enemies if you're going to be playing the knight. But unfortunately, just the components don't really have this built-in balance mechanic. There's also another thing. While the bosses are another cool feature of this game, they're not nearly as exciting as the board game versions, but they're still pretty cool. You can, of course, customize which 2 bosses you're facing, but they don't make that exactly easy to do. Rather than there being blank slots on the board where you could just put tokens that represent the 2 bosses that you're going to fight, they're already printed on the boards. Now, it's not a huge deal. Of course, you could just set the 2 decks you're going to face right then and there where the areas of the boss are, and then you'll know. The other problem is that the 2 hard enemies, the ones that normally you would defeat second, don't have a soul reward printed on them. Thus, if you want to face the 2 harder bosses together, technically for defeating the boss, you get nothing. Now, of course, again, this is easily fixed with just a house rule, add a soul count for one of the easy bosses onto these hard bosses. But it's just kind of annoying the designers didn't think of these little things. All of that being said, I put these games on pretty much the same level with each other. I would maybe personally put Dark Souls, a board game, just slightly higher than the card game, largely because of just these slight problems, and I like sort of the deeper experience of the board game. But I feel most people, it's actually going to be flipped. They're going to like the card game more just because it's shorter and they're able to actually do a lot more with it in a shorter period of time. Now, one thing the card game does have going for it is there has been one expansion announced. It's going to add 2 new classes, traps, 4 new bosses, and I believe an assortment of loot and enemies. Now, I don't know how much this expansion may make the game better or even worse, but at least Steamforge is showing some initiative here and supporting the game. It is possible that an expansion could make the game better. I do think, though, if you're a big Dark Souls fan and you want a smaller experience that isn't quite as big or crazy as the board game looks, the card game's not a bad choice. I don't think this is a great game. It's barely a good game. It's an okay game. I think fans of the Dark Souls series are going to find some enjoyment here. How long-lasting that enjoyment is may depend on how willing they are to house rule and kind of tweak the game. And also whether expansions actually add enough variety and change the game enough to make it more exciting going through again and again and again. And that does it for this review, lovers of Cardboard and Plastic. I hope you enjoyed it. If you're new to this channel, please remember to like, subscribe, leave a comment below, let me know your thoughts, let me know what other games you would like to review, or if you're excited for some game coming out in the future. I'm happy to chat, and I will see you next video. Bye.